Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be talking about power control and what are the top 10 power control champions in the game in my opinion. Everybody is free to disagree with my list. It is, as always, my personal opinion. Nothing is factually checked as it can be. Unless you work for Kabam. But hey, so first of all, as we start talking about power control, we need to realize that there are several forms of power to be controlled. Now, the game has several power gain effects and several nodes that affect power gain, which in kind of like conjunction with each other often create problems for us as players. And let's start off with the basic idea that champions can have either passive power gain buffs or passive power gain, or active power gain buffs and basically active power gain there, which can be nullified. So champion examples there is like Hyperion. Hyperion constantly gains an active power gain buff, which can be interacted with, which can be nullified, which can be dealt with, and there are things you can do about it. Therefore, quite often, let's say a nullified champion will be an effective form of power control when you are facing Hyperion. However, let's say a champion like Loki, Doctor Strange, or Symbiote Supreme, these champions have passive power gain without any buffs in them to be nullified. Therefore, you cannot interact with. You're basically forced to deal with this power either while draining, either while locking, or some other form of effect of your own, but that in this case cannot be a nullifying effect because there's nothing to nullify. Also in the game we have several power gain nodes. First and foremost, the oldest power gain node in the game is simply called increased power gain, which basically rewards opponents more power whenever they're being struck or they're striking you. That is probably one of the more kind of like effective, oldest and most common nodes you will see. The increased power gain by 200%, 100%, whatever, and there are several ways to work around it. Your typical power control methods will obviously work because there is power to control. However, also conserving your hits and hit counts is always a very valid strategy as well. For instance, Omega Red can deal with some of that stuff fairly well, just because you do not necessarily have to strike opponent to deal a lot of damage to them. Same as Quake, for instance, she doesn't have to hit opponent at all. Or Void, for example, where you can just slow play it and make sure you don't get cornered and let your debuffs damage over time take effect. And that will be also a form of power control at your disposal. And lastly, we have improved power gain effects, which basically amplifies these power gain effects that I spoke about before, of whether it be Hyperion, Loki, Doctor Strange, whatever, basically makes the power gain rate faster. That is a separate node that we have been seeing recently, which is exponentially more tricky to deal with under some difficult circumstances, you would say. And obviously then we have like Spite and some other nodes that give opponent power that we do need to be worried about, like backup recovery and stuff like that, to a smaller extent, which typically aren't as intrusive. Spite is one of the kind of harder things to deal with, but once again, Spite only awards opponent's power when you have buff on you, so using a champion that doesn't buff or being able to play in a manner that basically makes sure you do not have to place a buff on you, or therefore dexterity match will be an effective way of dealing with Spite. For instance, in this case, if you use Underweight on SpiderGwen and you do a lot of dashback intercepts and you do not mess them up, you can spend the entire fight without having buff on you and opponent hardly getting to a special attack if you're aggressive enough, and that will be also effective form of power control under the circumstances. So what I'm trying to say is there are different types of power gain and power to be controlled in the game, therefore there are different ways of dealing with them. So some champions that do not have any power control options inherently in them, kind of like you will never read a text that lock opponent's power or drain opponent's power or burn opponent's power in a champion description, can still wound up to be an effective power control champion under certain circumstances. However, so let's get on with our list. So I'm gonna start off with my list with a champion I briefly mentioned, and it's gonna be SpiderGwen, just because SpiderGwen does have an easy access to her Underweight. at level 1, so it's pretty much as quick as it can be when it comes to special attacks. She has high rate of applying it, also the duration is quite long, and if you manage to be aggressive, this can be one of the better forms of power control, and under many conditions it's going to be perfectly viable and sustainable. Sometimes you can spend an entire fight and basically make sure opponent doesn't throw more than one special attack. The initial special attack, they are gained basically at the beginning before you get your level 1, and that definitely can work. Also, her level 2 can reverse heal and power gain that opponents are having, and yeah, SpiderGwen is definitely, in my opinion, a worthy addition to this list, especially if you take a look at the different types of power gains that I have mentioned. And SpiderGwen can definitely deal very well with stuff like improved power gain, preventing opponent from gaining specials, quickly gaining momentum, and advancing in the fight. So when it comes to power control, I definitely do think that SpiderGwen is a worthwhile addition. Also, another note is quite often it is advantageous to use power control champions when dealing with tricky opponents, when basically bad stuff happens and they throw their special attacks, or nodes for instance, and therefore SpiderGwen's playstyle is pretty much perfect to counter stuff like Aspect of War, because not only she has slow debuff available to her, her heavy attack, her entry weight will prevent opponents from throwing the special attacks, therefore they will never actually trigger the unstoppable from Aspect of War, so on and so forth. So there are different kind of means and needs for power control in game, and I definitely feel that whatever niche SpiderGwen fills in, she does it very well. She has extremely high potency to trigger these effects, and she can definitely benefit you greatly dealing with different kind of matchups. However, she is at the bottom of the list, and the bottom of the list for a reason. Now, second entry in the list will be a bit more conventional champion when it comes to power control, and that will be Dormammu. Now, the reason Dormammu isn't up any higher is quite simple. He hits like a noodle. Even though his power control is great, he definitely can do the job extremely well controlling opponent's power. However, any kind of meaningful and serious fight will last ages, and it will result in you taking a lot of chip damage, therefore it's going to be potion heavy. Also, he has like negative physical resistance to physical hits and so on and so forth. So he has a lot of great in him. He synergizes with Mystic Dispersion, therefore he can get quicker to his power. His level 2 can power drain and lock, or at least lock, depending how many souls or whatever you have gathered that he needs. Also, he has access to power controlling his medium hits, therefore you can start controlling opponent's power starting from the first basically combo of the fight. You do not need to get a special attack to be able to control opponent's power, which is fantastic. All of that in theory should make him basically skyrocket to the top of the list, but no, he's not there. Why? Because he cannot realistically answer a lot of more difficult fights effectively without losing a huge chunk load of health, just because he's very squishy for a big guy. He doesn't hit hard at all. The damage output just is not there, and typically he's a champion you might want to bring in for a fight or two, but he's not going to be a champion you can actually use, let's say, on power gain lane and hope to clear it relatively item free. Now, that being said, he is a great power control champion. Unfortunately, he's just not a great champion overall. So that's why he's been relegated to spot number 9. And champion that we're going to look at next might surprise a few people, I suppose, but it is going to be Dr. Voodoo. So Dr. Voodoo, I think, very well deserves the 8th spot on this list, just because once he gets going, once he gets to his first couple of level 2s, you can make sure opponent never has any power. You can apply effects that drain their power passively over time. You can drain their power every time you strike them, so on and so forth. The downside there is that it is to a relative sacrifice of your damage output. You still gain some damage benefits from using these power burn effects, but it is nowhere near his kind of main strategy. And yeah, he has to get started properly. You have to have a good RNG, because with most of the power control champions, typically it's just kind of good enough if you get your level 2 or level 1 and you shoot that off, and then you're pretty much good to go and you're kind of in control of the fight. With Voodoo, it's not quite as simple, because there are several things that have to go right. You have to get some laws on opponent if they do not have generic buffs, especially, or if they do have generic buffs, then you will want to shoot off your level 1 to gain power, then hope to get some laws. So it's not as straightforward to set it up. Now, I have had many fantastic fights where this guy can throw, I don't know, 200 hits straight back to back, dash up intercepts, stand up intercepts. Opponents never get to even try and throw a special attack, and all that is great. The problem is that occasionally it is more difficult to set him up, and his damage output isn't the greatest as well to add on top of that. So he's one of those champions that can do fantastically when it comes to doing controlling opponent's power, but it also A, is slightly RNG reliant, B, is not the easiest thing to execute in the world. So that's why we are only leaving him at spot number 8. Now, spot number 7 is also maybe a bit less standard pick, and spot number 7 is gonna go to, where is she? Yes, it's a she. Oh, did I lose her? I'm just blind today. There we go, first top champ. So it's Rogue. Now, Rogue has a few tricks when it comes to dealing power control. Namely, obviously, everybody knows about her level 2. Level 2 drains opponent's power, steals opponent's power based on the damage it does. So basically, if you crit, you steal more power. And this champion, once it gets going, if you set yourself up right, you can just shoot special 2 after special 2, special 2 after special 2, and that is effective way how to deal with pretty much any of the aforementioned forms of power control, whether it's improved power gain, increased power gain, whatever. At any given point, you're going to be very close to your special attack thanks to your power steal from level 2, which can work absolutely fantastic for you. Also, I have a video showcasing how Rogue, for instance, can dismantle Hyperion just by launching her level 1, stealing the Hyperion's power gain buff, and making sure he can never gain it back for the rest of the fight. Now, that is not the easiest thing to pull off, but it's also there and available for her. But yeah, I do generally think just the fact and the frequency of what she can throw her level 2 attacks definitely makes her a respectable champion when it comes to dealing with power control. And she's one of those kind of like Swiss Army knives when it comes to removing debuffs quicker, so on and so forth, and just that insane ability to continuously spam special attack after special attack. I do value quite highly in Rogue. I have used it a lot in past to take on all or nothing nodes in war, so on and so forth. Especially in war, if you get to your, if you start off with a 1 bar of power, she gets to your level 2 really quickly, and then you can just have the entire fight up to you, basically. So yeah, I do think I value Rogue's power control higher than many other people do, but hey, it's my opinion, and that's why she is in spot number 7. Now, spot number 6 is going to be a relative newcomer, and largely my anything I will say here you can take with a bit of grain of salt, because I haven't had the most extensive amount of testing when it comes to actually using Black Widow Clairvoyant for power control reasons. However, I do believe she has all the makings of overall one of the better power control champions in the game. Why? Just because she has abilities to nullify active power gain buffs. It's perfect for fighting like Hyperions and Mordos and whatnot. She has a power drain on her level 2, which drains based on opponent's power meter. So the higher opponent's power meter, the more power you will drain. So at the same time, like, that kind of trickier, the riskier the fight, the closer the opponent is to getting to that level 3, the more power she will get back and steal from them. And the more power she steals from them, the quicker you can get to your level 2. Quite often you can shoot off back-to-back level 2s, which keep opponent's power in check. It does not necessarily mean that it will be the situation of them never throwing a special attack, but it can definitely be a situation of them never getting to a level 3, no matter how aggressive their power gain is. Additional to that, she has buff immunity on level 2, so you can prevent opponents from gaining buffs in that way. And she also interacts extremely well with Mystic Dispersion because she's a Mystic champion. She gains power herself every time she nullifies effects. So I just think she has extremely high potential of doing whatever Rogue did, spamming her special 2 and basically continuously gaining power and at the same time draining opponent's power. And to take it here, apply it with some more updated character mechanics, more versatility, access to Mystic Dispersion. So to a degree, kind of like an upgrade of the same situation which I spoke about with Rogue. And now, 5th best power control champion in the game, in my opinion. And there's going to be people who probably will go up in arms on that, is Quake. Now, Quake can deal with 2 out of 3 mentioned forms of power control. If opponent has an increased power gain, which is the most common form of power gain, then she is the best champion. There is nobody better than Quake when it comes to dealing with vast majority of the matchups on increased power gain, because she never strikes the opponent. Opponents never gain any power. They can have 300% power gain on them. They can have 4, 5, 600,000% power gain on them. Does not matter. She doesn't strike the opponent. She doesn't let the opponent land hits on her. They don't get the power. It doesn't matter how potent the power gain is. She can deal with that. Also, she has options to deal with active power gain buffs when it comes to dealing with like Mordo and things like that. Because she can nullify the opponent's build accuracy to 0, therefore they will not get any power gain buffs. However, she's absolutely hopeless and worthless when it comes to dealing with passive power gain. Now that is a big problem. Champions like Loki, Doctor Strange, Symbiote Supreme, especially when they are coped with improved power gain, basically she has nothing for that. She has no form of power control as such in her. Opponents will gain power regardless of what you do, whether you strike them or not. They can just sit there, get to their special attacks, launch them, destroy Quake. So she absolutely does not work there. But at the same time, the things that she does to increase power gain nodes, she just does the best. There's no rival. Therefore, I felt it fitting to leave her kind of like in the middle of the list as the best power control champion in some situations, and pretty much meme tier power control champion in other situations. So it has to be taken by case basis. That's why I emphasize that there are many different forms of power to be controlled in game, and therefore you need to look at these champions quite a bit differently often. And now let's moving on to spot number 4. And spot number 4 is also maybe not the more straightforward one, but to me it definitely makes sense, and it is Void. Because whenever there is a tricky Hyperion or quite often spike nodes and things like that, Void can always come to the rescue. Only reason I probably didn't put Void in 3rd or possibly 2nd spot is the fact that he is RNG reliant, and that is the biggest problem, because you never know when your petrified debuffs are gonna come, because they might come the last ones. However, once you have, let's say you had a fairly decent RNG, or you did the first part of the fight well, once you are stable in the fight, once you get your Fear of the Void active, he completely cancels out any and all of these power gains, whether they're active, whether they're passive, it doesn't matter. And that works great. Obviously, when it comes to dealing with simply a increased power gain while you're striking opponents, then Void has nothing for that. However, his playstyle in itself can also be counter to this kind of nodes, because you do not necessarily have to strike opponent to get them down. You can just procrastinate the fight, hit their block, push them back in the map, let your damage over time debuffs take care of everything, and your Fear of the Void is going to take care of any active or passive power gain effects, which kind of works perfect. And therefore, quite often when there are actual problem nodes or issues that you have to deal with, even though Void nowhere says that you can power drain opponent, he definitely is an super effective power control option and still works to this day in many matchups, and he's really great for it. And obviously there are all the additional benefits of using Void, as damage over time, heal reversal, so on and so forth. So definitely, in my opinion, one of the best power control champions in the game. At the same time, I might just be dodging the definition of power control a bit than most people would be used to, but that is the way I see power and controlling power in Marvel Contest of Champions. Now, champion number 3 again is kind of like a more or less similar case to Quake, just reversed. Because here we go, we have Dr. Octopus. When it comes to dealing with passive power gain and improved power gain, there's no better. You basically enter the fight, opponent gets power locked, you heavy them into the oblivion. That's the end fight, cheese, call it whatever. For that one form of power control, he's by far the best. Absolutely effortless. Just let the abilities work automatically, start dropping your heavy attacks, and then you have absolutely nothing to worry about in the fight. And that's why he's as high as he is in the list, just because the things that he can do in shredded. There's nobody better when it comes to dealing with passive power gains or power gain effects and improved power gain. Now, on the downside, he does not realistically have any kind of like power drain as such inbuilt in him, and his power control is exponentially weaker when it comes to dealing with your everyday average matchups. The things that I praised SpiderGwen about, let's say when it comes to dealing with Aspect of War, you can drop your underweight and you can just absolutely mince at opponents. And you can just hit them and they will never get a bar of power. You can't do that with Doc Ock, because those power locks, he can place an opponent and he will place an opponent, which will reduce that power gain to a degree. It's still nowhere near as potent as most of the other champions on this list. So therefore he is at the 3rd place. He's by far the best champion when it comes to dealing with improved power gain, just because you win the fight as soon as you enter, basically. Because yeah, it's just that simple. But he's lacking a bit in some other areas. And yeah, so I think a worthwhile 3rd spot for Dr. Octopus there. And now champion in the 2nd spot, the prince or the king of power control, still is Wujin. And it's quite simple. Wujin might be slightly outdated robot. He's still great though, because Wujin is as great as you are when it comes to doing stand-up intercept, dashback intercept, because he's not the hardest puncher. The fights will last a while. Depending on how well you play, you can still walk out of that fight without the scratch, basically, but that's another thing to talk about. However, he is as high up in the list as he is, just because of the simple fact that you can start off with past the bar power, which means from the 1st second of the fight, you have power control available to you on your special attack and effective power control. And additionally, that also can heal block the opponent, and that is immense. That is massive. Being able to push down opponent's power from wherever they are currently is a huge thing. Also, the synthesis, the frequency, and just the sheer power of the power drain that he has definitely puts him up here. Double immunities is great, obviously, as well, but he is still one of the best champions when it comes to dealing with huge power gain champions. And it's just as simple as that ability hasn't aged. It can't age, despite Wujin itself maybe being overshadowed by some other champions now. When it comes to flat out dealing with pretty much any form of power control, increased power control, improved power control, blah blah blah, whatever, anything and everything, Wujin can be your guy. If he can do the fight, his power control will be potent enough to handle whatever nodes there are on opponents. And also, definitely do not forget this poor gentleman over here. And obviously still, I believe, undisputed champion, undisputed queen of power control, the one power control champion that, in my opinion, still stands head and shoulders above the rest is Magic. Because Magic not only power drains, she also power locks opponents for extensive amounts of time, extremely reliably, synergized with Mystic Dispersion. Her level 2, basically the same situation that we spoke about Rogue. Once you get to your special 2, you're just going to keep spamming them and draining opponents' power, and this is basically that amplified times a lot, just because once you get to your level 2, the fight's pretty much over. If it is a straightforward fight, if you don't have to worry about, let's say, auto block or evades and stuff like that, then that's it. That's the fight. You need to get to your one level 2, which obviously can often be accommodated with Mystic Dispersion and some external help. And once you're there, done. That's it. If you don't make a mistake, the character will not fail you. You will just keep on spamming your level 2s. Opponent will never gain any power. He's going to be power locked. And that works for everything. Every single form of power control. If there is no power in opponent to be controlled, you basically win the game. It doesn't matter whether it's improved power gain, increased power gain, whether it's active or passive effects. She just takes it all away from them and makes it irrelevant. Now, there are a few other honorable mentions. As we noticed in this list, there are quite a few good tech champions when it comes to dealing with power control. And to go with that, there is definitely a worthwhile shout out to Captain America Infinity War. Where is that guy? And his synergy with Wujin and I believe some other guys. There we go. And it's extremely potent and I think underestimated. And the fact that he synergized with Wujin, which is by himself already a superbly effective power control champion, definitely deserves a shout out. Because that also makes all of your tech champions, to a degree, into power control champions. Definitely makes your life a lot easier. The synergy states that tech champions drain 100% opponent's max power after the opponent uses special attack. And there is an added bonus to that, because this power drain happens about a second after they launch special attack. Typically, if you can punish opponent's special attack, you will be able to land in a hit or two before the power drain kicks in and then takes away all of the power. Therefore, you get basically a couple of free shots in without worrying about opponent's power, which is actually quite huge in a lot of these fights. Definitely wanted to give a shout out to that. Now, there are other champions that I believe everybody would have wanted me to mention. For instance, Hawkeye, but Hawkeye, I believe, as great as he is when it comes to dealing with power control, when it comes to dealing with overall meta in current game, he just kind of lags behind. He has a great power control, but a lot of his damage relies on bleed, and he doesn't have really anything else, and he still need to get to that level 1, and we have better champions on the list. Now, maybe he does deserve a spot here, but I think that currently he suffers from a similar problem as a listed Dormammu in, that his power control is great, is good. His power control effects definitely would deserve him a spot on this list. However, he's being failed by everything else as a character. Right? He's just not a great champion overall. Power control is good. He, however, is not so much. Ghost Rider, for instance, Ghost Rider has decent power control abilities on his level 1 when it comes to dealing with power control buffs, level 2 when it comes, well, just power draining opponent, and level 3 preventing opponent from gaining power. However, to access all of that, and the fact that these are kind of like one-offs and you have to keep in constant cycles, I'm not saying it's not effective or it can be used. I'm saying it's definitely not the most straightforward or well kind of like presented plan when it comes to dealing with a lot of power control effects. I believe he can do more fights than people realize that he can do, but quite often all that brainstorming, figuring out which kind of like order you want to change which effect in to make sure that lasts this long, so on and so forth, is just not worth it. I believe there are better options, and just because of that, I will not put him on my list. Gwenpool and her Enderweight could have possibly replaced SpiderGwen in spot number 10. However, Gwenpool's Enderweight is a little bit too short and quite often falls off just too quickly. I have found myself remembering matches against Void, I believe, when map 6 was the final map of Alliance Quest, and that I did use Gwenpool and I did shoot off my level 2, and basically 2 times out of 5 at least my level 2 Enderweight would wear off before I actually managed to place a bleed on an opponent and refresh it. So it's not the easiest thing to pull off. It is an effective way to deal with opponent's power on kind of like regular matchups to prevent them from throwing special attacks, but it's not the easiest thing to execute. Now, Emma Frost has some awesome potential when it comes to dealing with power with her heavy attacks and basically making sure opponents gain only like a slither of power whenever you drop a heavy attack. But again, even though it can be super effective, it's not the more straightforward way to deal with opponent's power, especially for the majority of the people who are playing here. Psylocke's power control possibly is one of the greater ones, but only kind of answers really well to improved power gain. It doesn't answer to any power passive power gains and stuff like that. The main thing that she does, and she possibly should have been on this list, but I think the fact that she's penalized with her own power gain rate is just putting her quite a bit below, because her damage output is subpar and she suffers from the same sickness that Sentry does, that she's being penalized for no good reason. Unfortunately, that's why I do not feel that she would score as high as these top 10 champions did. She might have some better bits of power control than some other champions on this list, but I think overall when it comes to general usability in the game, she's still behind anyone in my top 10 list. And Stark Spider-Man, because Towns technically can also be a form of dealing with opponent's power, and he has that heavy attack power gain, power drain, which is useful, which resets every 30 minutes. However, once again, I do feel that anybody on this top 10 list deserves to be here more than Stark Spider-Man. Now that I have covered pretty much everything I wanted to, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. I hope you guys found it somewhat insightful. If you disagree with it, have at it. Come at me in the comment section. Tell me why I did wrong, who I did wrong, who I did injustice to. I will be gladly accepting all comments, replying to them, explaining my thought process. If somebody convinces me that I'm completely wrong, I might redo the list. Also, let me know if you do want me to make a video about separate forms of power control, and then make separate kind of like top 5 list when it comes to dealing with active power gain effects, passive power gain effects, improved power gain, increased power gain, stuff like that. But yeah, that will do for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the buttons, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya!